The sound of shattering glass and the crowd's jeering laughter followed Maggie Reed as she stumbled down the wooden steps of the general store, her cheek stinging from where Mrs. Patterson's hand had connected with her face. Blood trickled from her split lip, and her carefully mended dress bore fresh tears from the grasping hands that had shoved her toward the door. The accusations had started 3 days ago when cattle began dying on the Harrison Ranch, their bodies twisted and foaming at the mouth. Someone had poisoned the water supply, and somehow, impossibly, the blame had fallen on her shoulders simply because she had been seen near the creek gathering herbs for her remedies. "Get out of Silverton, you witch!" someone shouted from the crowd that had gathered outside. "We don't want your kind here." Maggie pressed her hand to her bleeding mouth and fought back tears as she made her way down the dusty main street toward the small cabin she had called home for the past 2 years. The Colorado mountains rose majestically in the distance, indifferent to her suffering. It was June of 1882, and the mining town of Silverton had been her refuge after her father died in a cave collapse, leaving her alone at 18 with nothing but his debts, and a skill for healing that people called unnatural when things went wrong. She packed quickly, her hands shaking as she rolled her few belongings into a worn canvas bag. The herbs she had gathered hung drying from the rafters, and she took them down carefully, wrapping them in cloth. Her mother's silver locket went around her neck, and she tied her long auburn hair back with a frayed ribbon. The sound of breaking windows made her move faster. They were throwing rocks at her home now, these people she had helped through fevers and injuries, whose children she had delivered and whose ailments she had eased. The horse her father had left her, a sturdy bay mare named Cassie, waited in the small stable behind the cabin. Maggie saddled her with trembling fingers, cinching the leather straps and securing her bag to the saddle. She had perhaps $20 to her name, hidden in a tin box that now rested in her pocket. It would not take her far, but anywhere seemed better than here. As she led Cassie into the street preparing to mount, a rock struck her shoulder. She cried out and nearly lost her grip on the reins. The crowd had grown larger, their faces twisted with anger and fear. Sheriff Morrison stood among them, his arms crossed, doing nothing to stop the violence. He had been one of the loudest voices accusing her, his own daughter having come down with scarlet fever just before the cattle poisoning. Never mind that Maggie had sat by the girl's bedside for 3 days straight, nursing her back to health without asking for payment. "You will hang if you are still here by sundown," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying across the street. "That is your only warning." Maggie pulled herself into the saddle, her shoulder throbbing. She turned Cassie away from the town center, away from the only home she had known since childhood, and urged the mare into a trot. Behind her, the jeering continued, following her like a curse. She did not look back. The road out of Silverton was little more than a dirt track that wound through the mountains, following the Animas River south. Maggie had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the town that had turned on her so completely. Tears finally came, streaming down her face as Cassie carried her away from everything familiar. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and the thin mountain air made each breath feel insufficient. She had ridden perhaps 5 miles when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Terror seized her heart, and she urged Cassie faster, but the mare was already tired from the climb. The rider behind her was gaining ground. Maggie's mind raced with horrible possibilities. Had they decided hanging at sundown was too generous? Would they drag her back to face some frontier justice that offered no mercy? "Wait," a man's voice called out. "Please, just wait. I am not going to hurt you." Something in his tone made Maggie slow Cassie to a stop. She turned in the saddle, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she kept in her boot. The rider who approached was not part of the mob. She recognized him vaguely as someone she had seen around town, always on the periphery, never quite part of the community. He rode a tall roan gelding and wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, his hat pulled low against the sun. He stopped his horse a respectful distance away, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Name is Samuel Kane," he said. His voice was rough but not unkind. "I saw what they did to you back there. It was not right." Maggie said nothing, studying him warily. Samuel Kane looked to be in his mid-20s, with a weathered face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, and they held something she had not seen much of lately: concern. "Where do you want to go?" he asked, settling his hands on his saddle horn. "You cannot just ride out into the mountains without supplies or a destination. It is dangerous country between here and anywhere else." "Why do you care?" Maggie's voice came out harsher than she intended, roughened by crying and fear. "Everyone else seems content to see me dead." "Because I know you did not poison those cattle," Samuel said simply. "I was working on the Harrison ranch when it happened. I saw the real culprit, or at least, I have a good idea who it was. But Harrison would not listen to a drifter cowboy over his neighbor's suspicions." Hope flickered in Maggie's chest, painful and fragile. "Who was it?" "Harrison's own son, trying to frame one of the other ranchers in a property dispute. But that is a problem for another day. Right now, we need to get you somewhere safe." Samuel shifted in his saddle, his horse dancing sideways. "I asked you a question. Where do you want to go?" Maggie looked down at her hands, gripping Cassie's reins so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have no family left, no friends who would take me in after today. I just knew I had to leave." Samuel was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. Then he nodded as if reaching a decision. "There is a settlement about 60 miles south, down near Durango. It is bigger than Silverton, more tolerant of strangers. You could make a fresh start there, use your healing skills. The town doctor died last winter, and they have been desperate for someone with medical knowledge." "Durango," Maggie repeated, testing the word. She had heard of it, a growing town that served as a railroad hub. It might as well have been the moon for all she knew of it. "And you think they would accept me?" "I think they would welcome you once they saw what you could do, but you will not make it there alone, not without proper supplies and protection." Samuel paused, then added, "I could ride with you if you would allow it." "I was planning to head south anyway, looking for ranch work. Been in Silverton too long as it is." Maggie studied him carefully, weighing her options. She did not know this man, had no reason to trust him beyond the kindness in his eyes and the fact that he had not already hurt her. But she also knew he was right about the dangers. A woman alone in the mountains was prey for any number of threats, from wild animals to worse. And something in her gut told her that Samuel Kane was genuine in his offer. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," Samuel said, and she believed him. "Except maybe the knowledge that I did the right thing when I had the chance. I have stood by and watched too much injustice in my life. I would like to change that pattern." Maggie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her. Then she nodded. "All right, we should stop in Rockwood for supplies if we are going to make it to Durango. I have a little money." "I have some too," Samuel said. "Between us, we will manage. Let us ride." They moved off together, their horses falling into step beside each other. The afternoon stretched long before them, the mountain air cooling as they climbed higher into the passes. Samuel proved to be a man of few words, but his silence was comfortable rather than oppressive. He pointed out landmarks, suggesting places they might camp for the night, and when they stopped to water the horses at a creek, he offered her a canteen without being asked. "How long have you been in Silverton?" Maggie asked as they rode, curiosity getting the better of her wariness. "About 6 months," Samuel replied. "Came looking for work after my last ranch folded. Drought killed most of the herd and the owner sold what was left. I have been moving from place to place for about 3 years now, ever since my parents died of typhoid back in Kansas." "I am sorry," Maggie said softly. She understood loss intimately. "My father died in a mining accident 2 years ago. He was all I had left. So we are both alone," Samuel observed, glancing at her. "Maybe that is why I noticed you in town. You had that same look about you, like you were always standing slightly apart from everyone else." Maggie had not realized anyone had noticed her at all beyond her usefulness as a healer. The thought that this quiet cowboy had seen her, truly seen her, made something warm unfurl in her chest. "I tried to belong," she said. "I thought if I helped enough people, made myself useful enough, they would accept me. But the moment something went wrong, I became the outsider again." "People fear what they do not understand," Samuel said. "Your healing, the way you know about herbs and remedies, it seems like magic to them. And magic makes people nervous." "It is not magic," Maggie protested. "It is just knowledge passed down from my mother and her mother before that. The plants have properties that help with sickness and pain. There is nothing supernatural about it." "I know that," Samuel said. "But try explaining it to folks who have never read a book in their lives and think anything beyond whiskey and prayer is witchcraft." They rode in silence for a while longer, the sun beginning its descent toward the western peaks. The landscape around them was breathtaking in its rugged beauty, all towering pines and rocky outcrops, with the occasional meadow bursting with wildflowers. Maggie felt some of the tension begin to leave her shoulders. Distance was helping, and so was the steady presence of the man riding beside her. As evening approached, Samuel led them off the main trail to a small clearing sheltered by a stand of aspens. A creek burbled nearby, providing fresh water, and there was enough grass for the horses to graze. "We will camp here tonight," he said, dismounting. "I will get a fire started if you want to see to the horses." They worked in companionable silence, each falling into their tasks. Maggie unsaddled both horses and rubbed them down with handfuls of grass, checking their hooves for stones. Samuel gathered wood and built a small fire, then produced a coffee pot and a bag of beans from his saddlebags. The smell of brewing coffee soon filled the clearing, mixing with the scent of pine and wood smoke. "I have some dried beef," Maggie offered, retrieving it from her pack. "And hardtack, though it is not much." "It will do," Samuel said, accepting the food. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, eating in silence. The stars were beginning to emerge overhead, brilliant against the darkening sky. Maggie had not felt safe in days, but here, in this small circle of firelight with this stranger who had chosen to help her, she felt something close to peace. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel said after a while, his voice thoughtful. "You may ask," Maggie replied, wrapping her arms around her knees. "What will you do in Durango? I mean, how will you set yourself up as a healer when you have no references, no one to vouch for you?" Maggie had been wondering the same thing. "I suppose I will have to prove myself through results, perhaps offer my services for free at first, until people see that I can help them. It is what I did in Silverton before everything went wrong." "That could work," Samuel said slowly. "Or you could partner with someone who already has a reputation in town. Make it seem like you are apprenticed to them, learning a trade. It might make people more comfortable with you." "And do you know such a person in Durango?" Maggie asked, surprised by his strategic thinking. "I might," Samuel said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I have a friend there, a woman named Martha Chen who runs a boarding house. She is practical and open-minded, and she has lived in Durango long enough to be respected. If I introduced you, explained the situation, she might be willing to let you work out of her establishment, room and board in exchange for tending to her guests and anyone else who needs help." "You would do that for me?" Maggie asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I said I would help you get settled," Samuel replied, poking at the fire with a stick. "That means more than just riding alongside you for a few days." They talked more as the night deepened, sharing stories of their pasts. Samuel spoke of growing up on a Kansas farm, of learning to rope and ride before he could properly read. His father had been a stern man but fair, and his mother had taught him to cook and mend his own clothes. When the typhoid had taken them both within a week of each other, Samuel had buried them in the family plot and ridden west, unable to bear the emptiness of the farmhouse. Maggie told him about her mother, a healer who had been beloved in their small Missouri town until she died of pneumonia when Maggie was 12. Her father had brought her to Colorado seeking his fortune in the mines, but he had found only hard work and an early grave. She had taught herself to read from her mother's old journals, teaching herself the healing arts through trial and error. "You are brave," Samuel said when she finished, "braver than you know." "I do not feel brave," Maggie admitted. "I feel terrified." "That is what bravery is," Samuel said. "Being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway." As the fire burned low, Samuel laid out his bedroll on one side of the clearing, and Maggie took the other, keeping the fire between them. She appreciated his respect for her space, his understanding that she needed to feel safe. Sleep came slowly, her body exhausted but her mind still racing with everything that had happened. But eventually, lulled by the crackling fire and the sound of the creek, she drifted off. She woke once in the night to find Samuel sitting up, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch. He saw her stir and nodded once, reassuringly, before turning his attention back to the darkness beyond the firelight. Maggie closed her eyes again, feeling safer than she had any right to feel. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of fresh coffee. Samuel had already rekindled the fire and was frying some bacon in a small pan. "Morning," he said when he saw her sit up. "We should eat and get moving. We can make Rockwood by evening if we keep a good pace." They broke camp efficiently, falling into a rhythm that felt natural despite having known each other less than a day. The trail descended gradually through pine forests and across meadows dotted with columbine. The morning was cool and pleasant, and Maggie found herself relaxing into the ride, her body adjusting to the steady motion of the horse beneath her. "Tell me about this friend of yours in Durango," Maggie said as they rode. "Martha Chen, you said?" Samuel nodded. "Her father came over from China to work on the railroads. He saved enough money to open a restaurant in Durango, but he died about 5 years back. Martha inherited the building and turned it into a boarding house. She is probably the best cook in town, and she does not take nonsense from anyone." "You will like her. You sound fond of her," Maggie observed. "She is a good friend," Samuel said. "When I first arrived in Durango looking for work, I was down to my last $2. Martha gave me a room and fed me for a week while I found a job, would not take a cent until I had steady pay. That is just the kind of person she is." They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. The day had grown warm, and Maggie splashed water from a stream onto her face, washing away the dust of the trail. Her shoulders still ached where the rock had struck her, but the swelling had gone down. She found herself stealing glances at Samuel when she thought he was not looking, taking in the way he moved with quiet confidence. The gentleness with which he handled the horses, the thoughtfulness in his eyes when he looked at the landscape around them. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, catching her gaze. Maggie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Just that I am grateful you came after me. I do not know what would have happened if I had tried to do this alone." "You would have managed," Samuel said, but there was warmth in his voice. "You are stronger than you think." "Maybe," Maggie said, "but it is easier with company." They reached Rockwood just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The small town sat in a valley, smaller than Silverton but with a friendlier air about it. Samuel led them to a general store that was just closing up for the day, and the proprietor, a round man with a jovial manner, agreed to sell them supplies. Maggie purchased flour, beans, salt pork, and coffee, while Samuel added ammunition and a new rope to their provisions. The storekeeper asked no questions about where they were headed or why they were traveling together, for which Maggie was grateful. They paid in cash and loaded their purchases onto the horses. "There is a small hotel on the other end of town," Samuel said. "We could get rooms for the night, have real beds and a hot meal. We have the money for it." The thought of sleeping in a real bed was tempting, but Maggie hesitated. "Would that be proper? People might talk." "Let them talk," Samuel said. "You are a paying customer, same as anyone else. And I will make sure the proprietor understands we need separate rooms." The hotel was a modest 2-story building with a restaurant attached. The woman behind the desk, middle-aged and efficient, showed no surprise at 2 dusty travelers requesting rooms. Samuel paid for both, waving away Maggie's protest. "You will need your money when you reach Durango," he said firmly. "Let me do this." The room Maggie was given was small but clean, with a real mattress and fresh linens. A pitcher of water and a basin sat on the dresser, and she washed thoroughly, scrubbing away days of fear and grime. She changed into her one other dress, a simple blue cotton that her father had bought her for her 19th birthday, the last gift she had received from him before his death. She brushed out her hair and rebraided it, staring at her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed older than her 20 years, with shadows under her green eyes and a new wariness in her expression. But there was also something else, something she had not seen in a long time: hope. Samuel was waiting in the restaurant when she came down, and he stood when he saw her, his eyes widening slightly. "You look nice," he said, and there was such sincerity in his voice that Maggie felt her cheeks warm again. "Thank you," she said, taking the seat across from him. "So do you." He had cleaned up too, his face scrubbed and his hair combed back, though it was already starting to fall forward over his forehead. He wore a clean shirt, and Maggie noticed for the first time that his eyes had flecks of green in them, catching the lamplight. They ordered stew and bread, and it was the best meal Maggie had eaten in weeks. The beef was tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked, and the bread was warm from the oven. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, and talked about inconsequential things: the weather, the landscape they had passed through, the quality of the coffee. "Tomorrow we will reach the halfway point," Samuel said. "There is a place I know, an old line shack that hunters use. We can shelter there tomorrow night, then push on to Durango the day after." "Have you traveled this route often?" Maggie asked. "A few times," Samuel said. "I worked a cattle drive last year that took us through this way. And I have been to Durango twice since then, visiting Martha and picking up work when I could find it." "You never thought to settle there permanently?" Maggie asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering. "I have never been good at settling," he admitted. "Always felt like I was looking for something, though I could not tell you what. Maybe that will change someday." "Maybe it will," Maggie said softly, holding his gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that neither of them put into words. The air seemed to thicken with possibility, with the awareness that their lives had intersected in a way that might prove significant. But it was too soon, too fragile to name, and so they both looked away, finishing their meal in a silence that felt charged with unspoken things. Maggie slept deeply that night, her body grateful for the comfortable bed. She dreamed of green fields and a house with a garden, of children laughing and strong arms around her. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she felt more rested than she had in months. They left Rockwood after a quick breakfast, their horses refreshed and their supplies restocked. The trail continued south, following the river through increasingly dramatic landscape. The mountains rose higher here, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. Eagles soared overhead, and they saw deer grazing in the meadows. Around noon, they stopped to water the horses at a particularly scenic spot where the river widened into a pool. Maggie dismounted and walked to the water's edge, looking down at her reflection. Samuel came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool mountain air. "I was thinking," he said, not looking at her. "When we get to Durango, after I introduce you to Martha, I was thinking I might stick around for a while. There is usually ranch work to be had in the area, and I could check in on you, make sure you are settling in all right." Maggie's heart leaped, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "You do not have to do that. You have done so much already." "I know I do not have to," Samuel said. "I want to. Unless you would rather I did not." "No," Maggie said quickly, then laughed at her own eagerness. "I mean, I would like it if you stayed. You have been kind to me, and I would appreciate having a friend in a new town." "Friends," Samuel repeated, and there was something in his tone that suggested the word did not quite encompass what he was feeling. But he smiled and nodded. "Friends, then." They rode on, and Maggie found herself increasingly aware of Samuel's presence beside her. She noticed the way he sat his horse, easy and confident, the way his hands were gentle on the reins. She noticed how he scanned the landscape constantly, alert for danger, protecting her without making her feel weak. She noticed the rare smiles he gave, how they transformed his usually serious face into something warm and open. And she wondered if he noticed things about her too, the way she sometimes caught him looking at her when he thought she was not paying attention. The line shack Samuel had mentioned appeared in late afternoon, a rough wooden structure set in a clearing near a spring. It was basic but solid, with a stone fireplace and a few pieces of rough furniture. Someone had left a stack of firewood inside, and there were hooks on the walls for hanging gear. "It is not much," Samuel said as they dismounted, "but it beats sleeping on the ground, and we will not have to worry about rain if any blows in." They settled the horses in a makeshift corral beside the shack, then set about making camp. Maggie gathered kindling while Samuel started a fire in the fireplace, and soon they had coffee brewing and beans heating in a pot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Maggie stood in the doorway of the shack watching the display. Samuel came to stand beside her, 2 tin cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and their fingers brushed as she took it. The contact sent a jolt through her, unexpected and electric. "Beautiful, is it not?" Samuel said, looking at the sunset. "Yes," Maggie agreed, but she was looking at his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the fading light caught in his hair. They ate their simple dinner as darkness fell, the fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth. The shack had only one room, with 2 rough bunks built into opposite walls. They would be sleeping closer tonight than they had the previous nights, and Maggie was acutely aware of the intimacy of the situation. "Tell me something about yourself that no one else knows," Samuel said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Maggie thought about it, sipping her coffee. "I can sing," she said finally. "My mother taught me when I was little. I have a good voice, though I have not used it much since she died. It felt wrong somehow singing without her." "Will you sing now?" Samuel asked. "I would like to hear you." Maggie hesitated, then nodded. She closed her eyes and began to sing, an old ballad her mother had loved about a sailor and his lost love. Her voice, unused for so long, was rusty at first but gained strength as she continued. The melody filled the small shack, sweet and haunting. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find Samuel staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "You should sing more often." "Maybe I will," Maggie said. "Your turn. Tell me something no one else knows about you." Samuel was quiet for so long that Maggie thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I am afraid of being alone, not just physically alone, but going through life without someone to share it with. I have been moving from place to place for 3 years, telling myself I am looking for the right opportunity, the right job. But really, I think I have been looking for a reason to stop moving, for someone who would make me want to stay in one place." The honesty in his words took Maggie's breath away. She had not expected such vulnerability from this quiet cowboy. "Have you found it?" she asked softly. "That reason?" Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her heart race. "I think maybe I am starting to," he said. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Maggie wanted to cross the space that separated them, to close the distance and see what might happen. But fear held her back, fear of moving too fast, of mistaking gratitude for something deeper, of getting hurt again. Samuel seemed to sense her hesitation because he stood and gathered their empty plates. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "We have a long ride tomorrow." They prepared for sleep, each taking one of the bunks. Maggie lay awake long after Samuel's breathing had evened out into sleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through the tangle of her feelings. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. Was it just the intensity of their situation, the forced intimacy of traveling together? Or was it something real, something that could grow into more? She did not have answers, and eventually, exhaustion claimed her. Morning brought with it a sense of anticipation. Today they would reach Durango, and with it, a new chapter of Maggie's life would begin. She was excited and terrified in equal measure. As they saddled the horses and packed up their gear, Samuel was quieter than usual, and Maggie wondered if he was having second thoughts about staying in Durango. The landscape changed as they descended from the high mountains, the pine forests giving way to scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. The day grew warmer, and they stopped frequently to rest the horses and drink from their canteens. Around mid-afternoon, they crested a rise and saw Durango spread out before them in the valley below. It was larger than Maggie had expected, a proper town with brick buildings and paved streets in the center. She could see the railroad depot, several churches, and what looked like a main commercial district. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from this distance she could hear the faint sounds of activity. Hammers ringing, wagons rattling, people calling to each other. "There it is," Samuel said, satisfaction in his voice. "Durango." They rode down into the town as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. People glanced at them as they passed, but with curiosity rather than hostility. Maggie sat straighter in her saddle, trying to project confidence she did not quite feel. Samuel led them through the streets with the ease of familiarity, and soon they were stopping in front of a 3-story building with a sign that read Chen's boarding house. Samuel dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then came around to help Maggie down. His hands on her waist were warm and steady, and he held her perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary before stepping back. "Ready?" he asked. Maggie took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The front door of the boarding house opened into a spacious entry hall with a desk on one side and a doorway leading to what looked like a dining room on the other. The smell of cooking filled the air, something savory with ginger and garlic. A woman emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with black hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Samuel Kane," she said, her face breaking into a wide smile. "As I live and breathe." "I was beginning to think you had forgotten about us." "Never, Martha," Samuel said, returning her smile. "It is good to see you. I have brought someone who needs your help." Martha turned her assessing gaze on Maggie, and Maggie felt herself being evaluated in a way that was thorough but not unkind. "And who might this be?" "This is Maggie Reed," Samuel said. "She is a healer, trained by her mother and experienced in herbal medicine. She ran into some trouble in Silverton through no fault of her own, and she needs a fresh start. I thought perhaps you might have room for her here, and that the town could use her skills." Martha listened as Samuel explained the situation, giving enough detail to make Maggie's circumstances clear without dwelling on the ugliness of what had happened. Maggie stood silent, letting him speak for her, and felt grateful for his way with words. When Samuel finished, Martha studied Maggie for a long moment. Then she said, "Can you really heal people, or is this man just sweet on you?" Maggie felt her face flush but met Martha's gaze steadily. "I can heal. I have delivered babies, set broken bones, and treated everything from fevers to snake bites. I do not claim to work miracles, but I know my craft." "Show me your hands," Martha said. Confused, Maggie held out her hands. Martha took them, turning them over, examining the calluses and stains. "These are working hands," she said approvingly. "Hands that know herbs and plants. I can see the traces of tinctures under your nails, and your fingers are nimble. My own grandmother was a healer back in Canton. I know something of the trade." "Then you will help her?" Samuel asked hopefully. Martha released Maggie's hands and crossed her arms, considering. "I will make you a deal, Maggie Reed. You can have room and board here in exchange for tending to my guests when they fall ill, which happens more often than you might think. Miners are always getting injured or sick, and the nearest doctor is 2 days' ride away. If word spreads and other people start coming to you for help, you can charge them what you think is fair, and I will take 10% for the use of my space. Does that sound reasonable?" It sounded more than reasonable. It sounded like a lifeline. "Yes," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I will not let you down." "See that you do not," Martha said, but her tone was kind. "Samuel, help her with her things. I will show her to a room on the 3rd floor. It is small but private, and it has a window overlooking the street. You can use it to dry your herbs." The room Martha showed her was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a chair. But it was clean and bright, with crisp white curtains and a colorful quilt on the bed. Maggie set down her bag and turned to Martha with tears in her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you." "Thank me by being good at what you do," Martha said, "and by being honest with me. I do not tolerate liars or thieves under my roof, but I am loyal to those who prove themselves trustworthy. Now, come down to the kitchen when you have settled in. I will feed you both a proper meal." After Martha left, Maggie sank onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of relief. She had a place to stay, a way to earn her keep, and the protection of Martha's formidable presence. It was more than she had dared hope for. A soft knock on the door made her look up. Samuel stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "May I come in?" "Of course," Maggie said, standing. Samuel entered and closed the door behind him, leaving it slightly ajar for propriety's sake. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "I know this is all happening very fast." "I am better than all right," Maggie said. "Thanks to you, Samuel, I do not know how I can ever repay you for what you have done." "You do not owe me anything," Samuel said. "I did what anyone decent would have done." "No," Maggie said firmly. "You did what a good man would do, and I think good men are rarer than they should be." They stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Maggie felt her pulse quicken as Samuel took a step closer, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. "Maggie," he said softly, and her name on his lips sent shivers down her spine. "These past few days, riding with you, talking with you, I have felt something I have not felt in a long time, maybe ever. And I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other, but I need to say this before I lose my nerve." "Say what?" Maggie whispered, though she thought she knew. "That I would like to court you properly," Samuel said. "I would like to stay in Durango and find work here, and I would like to spend time with you and see where this thing between us might go. If you feel it too, that is." Maggie's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must surely hear it. "I feel it," she said. "I have been feeling it since you first rode after me, maybe even before that if I am honest. But Samuel, I am damaged goods now. The people in Silverton have branded me a witch and worse. Are you sure you want to tie yourself to someone with that kind of reputation?" "I am sure," Samuel said without hesitation. "I do not care what ignorant people think. I care about you, about who you are, not about what some frightened townspeople said when they were looking for a scapegoat." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Samuel reached up and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm and calloused, and Maggie leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Maggie breathed. His lips met hers gently at first, tentative and questioning. But when Maggie responded, sliding her arms around his neck and pressing closer, the kiss deepened. It was everything a first kiss should be, tender and passionate, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maggie felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. "I have wanted to do that since yesterday morning," Samuel admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "I have wanted you to," Maggie replied, laughing breathlessly. They stood together for a long moment, simply holding each other, until Martha's voice calling them to dinner broke the spell. Samuel stepped back reluctantly, his hands trailing down Maggie's arms until he was holding just her fingertips. "We should go down," he said. "But Maggie, I meant what I said. I am going to court you properly. That means taking things slowly, giving you time to settle in and build your new life here. I will not rush you or push for more than you are ready to give." "And if I am ready to give it?" Maggie asked, feeling bold. Samuel's eyes darkened. "Then I will consider myself the luckiest man in Colorado. But for now, let us eat. I am starving and Martha's cooking is legendary." Dinner was a lively affair, served family style in the boarding house dining room. Several other guests were present, including 2 minors, a traveling salesman, and an elderly couple who were visiting their daughter in town. Martha presided over the table with cheerful efficiency, making sure everyone had plenty of food and introducing Maggie as her new assistant. The other boarders welcomed Maggie warmly, asking about her skills and sharing stories of injuries and ailments that had plagued them in the past. One of the miners had a persistent cough that he had been ignoring for months, and Maggie promised to prepare a tea for him that would help. The elderly woman mentioned that her joints ached terribly in the mornings, and Maggie described a poultice that might bring relief. By the end of the meal, Maggie felt that she had found not just a place to stay but the beginnings of a community. Samuel sat beside her throughout dinner, and several times their hands brushed under the table, each touch sending sparks through her. After dinner, Samuel announced that he was going to find lodgings for himself and look for work in the morning. "There are several ranches in the area that might be hiring," he said. "And I heard in town that the Thompson spread is looking for an experienced hand." "You will come back, though?" Maggie asked, unable to keep the anxiety from her voice. "Every chance I get," Samuel promised. "You will not be rid of me that easily." He said his goodbyes to Martha, thanking her profusely for taking Maggie in, and then walked Maggie out to the front porch. The evening was cool and pleasant, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I will see you tomorrow," Samuel said, taking both of her hands in his. "Sleep well, Maggie Reed." "You too, Samuel Kane," Maggie replied. He kissed her once more, sweetly and briefly, and then he was gone, leading his horse down the street toward the livery. Maggie watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned to find Martha standing in the doorway, and knowing smile on her face. "That is a good man you have found there," Martha said. "Do not let him slip away." "I do not intend to," Maggie said firmly. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Maggie threw herself into establishing her practice, starting with the residents of the boarding house and gradually expanding as word of her skills spread through Durango. She treated the miner's cough with an infusion of mullein and coltsfoot, and within a week he was breathing easier. She prepared a salve of comfrey and arnica for the elderly woman's aching joints, and the relief was immediate. Martha proved to be not just a landlady but a friend and mentor. She introduced Maggie to the other business owners in town, vouching for her skills and character. She taught Maggie how to navigate the social politics of Durango, who to trust and who to avoid. And she asked nothing in return except that Maggie work hard and be honest, which Maggie was more than happy to do. Samuel found work at the Thompson Ranch, just as he had hoped. It was a large spread about 10 miles outside of town, and he came into Durango twice a week for supplies and, Maggie suspected, to see her. They fell into a pattern of meeting for dinner at the boarding house on Wednesdays and Sundays, and sometimes Samuel would take her for walks along the river or rides out into the countryside. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Samuel told her about his desire to someday have his own small ranch, a place where he could raise horses and cattle and put down permanent roots. Maggie shared her hope to open a proper clinic one day, a place where anyone could come for help regardless of their ability to pay. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not the sudden, overwhelming passion of storybooks, but something deeper and more enduring. It was built on respect and shared values, on long conversations and comfortable silences, on the way Samuel made her laugh, and the way Maggie made him think about things differently. It was in the small gestures, the way he always made sure her horse was properly cared for after their rides, the way she always had coffee ready when he arrived for dinner, the way they reached for each other's hands without thinking. 3 months after arriving in Durango, on a crisp autumn evening with the aspens turning gold in the mountains, Samuel asked Maggie to go for a walk with him. They followed the river out of town until they reached a spot where the water tumbled over rocks, creating a natural pool. The setting sun painted everything in shades of amber and rose. "I have something to ask you," Samuel said, and Maggie's heart began to race. They had not spoken explicitly about the future, though it hung between them, full of promise. "What is it?" Maggie asked. Samuel took both her hands in his expression serious. "Maggie Reed, these past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. You are smart and kind and brave, and you make me want to be a better man. I know I do not have much to offer right now." I am just a ranch hand with some savings and a lot of dreams. But I am going to make something of myself, I promise you that. And when I do, when I have a place of my own and can provide properly for a wife, I am going to ask you to marry me." Maggie felt tears spring to her eyes. "Samuel." "But I could not wait to tell you," Samuel continued, his voice urgent. "I needed you to know that I am serious about this, about us. I am not going anywhere. I am here for as long as you will have me." "I will always have you," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "Always, Samuel, I love you." It was the first time either of them had said the words aloud, and they hung in the air between them, precious and perfect. "I love you too," Samuel said, pulling her into his arms. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, and Maggie felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. Just a few months ago, she had been driven from her home in disgrace, frightened and alone. Now she had a purpose, a place, and a man who loved her. Life could change so quickly, she thought, for better or worse. She was grateful beyond words that it had changed for the better. As winter approached, Maggie's reputation as a healer continued to grow. She treated everything from minor cuts and bruises to more serious ailments. She delivered her first baby in Durango, a healthy boy born to one of the miners and his wife. And the gratitude in their eyes when she placed the infant in his mother's arms made her realize how much she had been missing this work during her exile from Silverton. Samuel continued to work at the Thompson Ranch, and Maggie could see him changing as the months passed. He was saving money with single-minded determination, and he spent his few free hours learning everything he could about horse breeding and ranch management. Mr. Thompson, impressed by Samuel's dedication and skill, began giving him more responsibility, and there was talk of making him foreman when the current one retired in the spring. They continued their courtship with Martha as their benevolent chaperone. Samuel came to Sunday dinners at the boarding house, and Maggie sometimes rode out to the ranch to bring him lunch and spend a few stolen hours in his company. They talked about their future with increasing specificity, planning the house they would build, the children they hoped to have, the life they would create together. On Christmas Eve, Samuel surprised her with a gift, a small wooden box that he had carved himself, decorated with an intricate pattern of flowers and vines. Inside was a letter, written in his careful hand, that began "To my future wife," and went on to describe all the things he loved about her, all the reasons he wanted to spend his life with her. Maggie cried when she read it, and she kissed him soundly in Martha's parlor, earning an indulgent laugh from the older woman. "You two are good for each other," Martha said, bringing them cups of hot cider. "I have been watching you court, and I approve. But Samuel Kane, if you are going to marry this girl, you should probably do it sooner rather than later. People are starting to talk about how much time you spend together." "I want to have something to offer her first," Samuel said. "A real home, not just a ranch hand's wages." "She does not need a palace," Martha said. "She needs you, but you will figure that out in your own time." The new year of 1883 brought changes. In February, Mr. Thompson called Samuel into his office and offered him not just the foreman position but the opportunity to buy a small parcel of land on the edge of the ranch property. It was 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, and Thompson was willing to finance it over 5 years at a reasonable rate. "You have proven yourself to be reliable and hardworking," Thompson told him. "And I would rather have you as a neighbor than see you leave to find your fortune elsewhere. What do you say?" Samuel said yes without hesitation. That evening he rode into town and went straight to the boarding house, finding Maggie in her room organizing her supplies. He was dusty from the road and grinning from ear to ear. "I have land," he announced without preamble. 200 acres, and Thompson is financing it. I can start building a house this spring." Maggie dropped the jar of dried lavender she had been holding and threw her arms around his neck. "That is wonderful, Samuel. I am so proud of you." "There is more," Samuel said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I know we talked about waiting until the house was built, but Maggie, I do not want to wait any more. I want you to be my wife now, not in 6 months or a year. We can live in town until the house is ready, or we can stay on the ranch in the bunkhouse if you do not mind roughing it for a while. I do not care where we live as long as we are together. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Maggie said without hesitation. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, told me to give it to a woman worthy of wearing it. You are that woman, Maggie." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Maggie looked down at it, tears streaming down her face and then back up at Samuel. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Durango. Martha stood up with Maggie, and Mr. Thompson stood with Samuel. The whole town seemed to turn out for the wedding, testament to how well both of them had integrated into the community. Maggie wore a new dress that Martha had helped her sew, pale green with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Samuel had picked that morning. As she walked down the aisle toward Samuel, she thought about the day she had fled Silverton in fear and shame. She thought about the cowboy who had ridden after her, asking where she wanted to go. She had not known the answer then, but she knew it now. She had wanted to go wherever he was. She had wanted to go home, and home turned out to be not a place but a person. Samuel's eyes shone with tears as she reached him, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, his kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of all the days to come. They spent their wedding night in the best room at Durango's finest hotel, and it was everything Maggie had dreamed it would be. Tender and passionate, awkward and perfect. Samuel was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Maggie felt a completeness she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the lamplight, talking quietly about the future. Samuel traced lazy patterns on her shoulder and Maggie played with his hair, marveling at the fact that this man was now her husband. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Maggie replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about that day in Silverton, how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you came riding after me, and everything changed." "I think about that day too," Samuel said. "I remember seeing you in town before that, noticing you. There was something about you that drew me in, a sadness in your eyes that I wanted to ease. When I saw what they did to you, I knew I could not let you face the world alone." "Do you ever regret it?" Maggie asked. "Coming after me, changing your plans?" "Never," Samuel said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Maggie Kane." Maggie smiled at the sound of her new name. Maggie Kane. It sounded right, like something she had been waiting her whole life to become. They moved into a small house in town, while Samuel worked on building their home on the land Thompson had sold him. Maggie continued her healing work, and Martha reduced the rent on her room to almost nothing, happy to keep her friend close. Samuel spent every spare moment working on the house, and Maggie helped when she could, mixing plaster and painting walls. By summer, the house was finished. It was simple but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a large kitchen where Maggie could prepare her medicines. There was a barn for animals and a garden plot that Maggie immediately began planting with medicinal herbs. Samuel built her a special drying shed where she could hang plants away from the dust and sun, and he surprised her with a work table where she could mix her tinctures and salves. They moved in on a warm July evening, carrying their few possessions across the threshold together. That night, they sat on their front porch and watched the sun set over their land, and Samuel pulled Maggie close. "I want to build something here," he said. "Not just a ranch, but a life, a legacy. I want our children to grow up knowing they have roots, knowing they belong somewhere." "How many children?" Maggie asked, smiling against his shoulder. "As many as you want to give me," Samuel replied, "though I am hoping for a whole houseful." They got their wish sooner than expected. By autumn, Maggie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to be certain before telling Samuel. When she finally confirmed it with her own knowledge of her body's signs, she planned a special dinner. Samuel came in from working with the horses to find the table set with their best dishes and candles lit. Maggie had made his favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, and there was even a pie cooling on the windowsill. "What is the occasion?" Samuel asked, washing his hands at the pump. "Sit down," Maggie said, barely able to contain her excitement. Samuel sat, looking curious but not yet suspicious. Maggie served him and then sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "I have news," she said. "We are going to have a baby." Samuel's fork clattered to his plate. "We are." "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be," Maggie said. "I am about 2 months along, which means the baby should come in late March or early April." Samuel stood so quickly his chair fell backward. He came around the table and pulled Maggie into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Maggie, that is the best news I have ever heard. You are happy then?" Maggie asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. I cannot believe it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Maggie continued her healing work, though Samuel worried constantly about her overexerting herself. She assured him that she knew her own limits and that staying active was actually good for her and the baby. As her belly grew, Samuel became increasingly protective, building her a rocking chair for the porch and making sure she had everything she needed. They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Samuel built a cradle from pine, carving it carefully and sanding it smooth. Maggie sewed tiny gowns and blankets, and Martha contributed a quilt that had been in her family for generations. The second bedroom, which they had left empty, became a nursery. On a bright April morning in 1884, Maggie went into labor. Martha came out to the ranch to help, and Samuel paced the kitchen floor, helpless and terrified. The labor was long but not complicated, and when the baby finally arrived just after sunset, it was a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and a powerful set of lungs. Martha placed the baby in Maggie's arms, and Maggie looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered. Samuel came in, his face white with worry, but his expression transformed when he saw his wife and child. He sat on the edge of the bed and touched the baby's tiny hand with one gentle finger, his eyes full of wonder. "What should we name him?" he asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Maggie knew. "Thomas," she said, "after my father." "Thomas Kane." "Thomas," Samuel repeated, and then he was crying too, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming love. "Hello, Thomas. I am your papa." The first year of Thomas's life was exhausting and wonderful. Maggie had helped deliver dozens of babies, but found that caring for her own child was entirely different. Samuel was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with Thomas when he cried and playing with him for hours when he came in from the ranch work. They were tired and often overwhelmed, but they were happier than either had imagined possible. The ranch was thriving. Samuel had built a small herd of cattle and was developing a reputation for breeding quality horses. People came from miles around to buy his stock, and the money, while not abundant, was steady. Maggie's healing practice continued to grow as well, and between the two of them, they were making a good life. On Thomas's first birthday, they threw a party and invited everyone they knew. Martha came, of course, and Mr. Thompson and his family. Many of the townspeople from Durango made the trip out to the ranch, and the house was filled with laughter and conversation. As Maggie watched her son toddle around on unsteady legs, chasing after the ranch dogs, and saw Samuel hoisting the boy onto his shoulders, she felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Happy?" Martha asked, coming to stand beside her on the porch. "So happy," Maggie confirmed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." "You earned it," Martha said. "Both of you did. You took something terrible and turned it into something beautiful. That takes courage." As the years passed, the Kane family continued to grow and prosper. Maggie gave birth to 2 more children. A daughter they named Rose in 1886, and another son, James, in 1888. The house rang with children's laughter, and Samuel expanded it, adding on 2 more bedrooms and a larger parlor. The ranch grew too. Samuel hired 2 hands to help with the work, and they ran cattle and horses successfully. He bought more land from Thompson and began to be known as one of the more successful ranchers in the area. Maggie opened a proper clinic in town, spending 3 days a week there and the rest at home with the children. Martha helped with child care, becoming a beloved honorary grandmother to the Kane children. Sometimes, usually late at night when the children were asleep, Maggie and Samuel would sit on their porch and talk about how far they had come. They never forgot those early days, the fear and uncertainty, the way their lives had intersected at exactly the right moment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not come after you that day?" Samuel asked once. "I try not to," Maggie admitted, "because I cannot imagine my life without you. You saved me, Samuel." "We saved each other," Samuel corrected, taking her hand. "I was lost before I met you, drifting from place to place without purpose. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build something permanent. You saved me just as much as I saved you." In 1890, news reached them from Silverton. The real culprit behind the cattle poisoning had finally confessed on his deathbed, clearing Maggie's name. Several of the townspeople who had driven her out wrote letters of apology, expressing shame at how they had treated her. Sheriff Morrison included a formal letter stating that all charges against her had been dropped, and that she was welcome to return to Silverton if she wished. Maggie read the letters sitting at her kitchen table, with Samuel standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders. When she finished, she folded them carefully and put them in the stove, watching them burn. "You are not going back?" Samuel asked. "Why would I?" Maggie replied. "I have nothing there. Everything I love, everything that matters is here. Silverton drove me out, but it led me to you. I cannot be angry about that." "You are a remarkable woman, Maggie Kane," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. "I am a happy woman," Maggie corrected. "That is all that matters." As their children grew older, Maggie and Samuel made sure to teach them the values that had sustained their own relationship. Kindness, hard work, loyalty, and the importance of doing what was right even when it was difficult. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the horses alongside his father. Rose was curious and intelligent, always asking questions about Maggie's healing work and wanting to help. James was the wild child, full of energy and mischief, keeping them all on their toes. In 1895, when Thomas was 11, Rose was 9, and James was 7, Samuel received an offer to buy the remaining portion of Thompson's ranch. The old man was retiring and moving to California to live with his daughter, and he wanted his land to go to someone who would care for it as he had. It was a significant investment, but Samuel and Maggie talked it over and decided to take the risk. They borrowed money from the bank and bought the land, tripling the size of their operation overnight. It was a lot of work, and there were times when they wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew, but the whole family pitched in. Thomas, young as he was, proved to have a natural talent for ranching. Rose helped Maggie with the healing work and also kept the household running smoothly. Even James, for all his wildness, did his part, feeding animals and fetching water. The expanded ranch thrived, and within 3 years they had paid off the bank loan. Samuel hired more hands and built a larger barn. Maggie's clinic in Durango moved to a bigger space, and she took on an apprentice, a young woman named Sarah who reminded Maggie of herself at that age, curious, dedicated, and skilled with herbs. In 1900, on their 17th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Maggie on a trip to Denver. It was the first time they had left the ranch for more than a day since the children were born, and Martha insisted on staying with the children so they could have time alone together. They stayed in a fancy hotel and ate at nice restaurants, and Samuel bought Maggie a beautiful shawl from one of the city's department stores. On their last night, sitting in their hotel room, Samuel pulled out a letter he had been carrying in his pocket. "I wrote this the night before we got married," he said. "I have been waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Maggie unfolded the letter with trembling hands and read, "My dearest Maggie, tomorrow you will become my wife, and I will become the luckiest man alive. I want you to know that I see you, all of you, not just the healer or the woman who needed rescuing, but the brave, brilliant, beautiful soul underneath. I promise to love you every day of my life, in good times and bad, in sickness and health, through whatever challenges come our way. I promise to be your partner, your protector, your friend. I promise to build you the life you deserve, full of love and laughter and purpose. You have already given me more than I ever dreamed of having. I will spend the rest of my life trying to give you the same. All my love now and always, Samuel." Maggie finished reading with tears streaming down her face. "You have given me everything," she said. "More than I ever dreamed possible. You kept every promise, Samuel. And I will keep them for the rest of our lives," Samuel said, taking her in his arms. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a young man and started courting a local girl, the daughter of one of their neighbors. Rose followed in her mother's footsteps and became an apprentice healer, learning everything Maggie could teach her. James, to everyone's surprise, developed a passion for music and spent his evenings teaching himself to play the guitar. In 1905, Thomas married his sweetheart in a ceremony at the ranch, and Samuel and Maggie watched their eldest son start his own family. Thomas and his wife stayed on the ranch, building a house on the far end of the property, and the cycle of family and life continued. Maggie and Samuel grew older together, their hair graying and their faces lining with the passage of time. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper, enriched by decades of shared experiences and mutual support. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset over the land they had built together. In 1910, on a warm summer evening much like the one when they had first moved into their house, Samuel and Maggie sat outside with their grandchildren playing in the yard. Thomas's children, twin girls, were chasing chickens and shrieking with laughter. Rose, now a skilled healer in her own right, was visiting with her husband, a kind schoolteacher from Durango. James was inside, playing guitar for Martha, who was now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack. "We did all right, did we not?" Samuel said, watching the scene before them. "We did more than all right," Maggie replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We built something beautiful." "Do you ever think about that day?" Samuel asked. "The day I rode after you." "Every day," Maggie said. "It was the day my real life began, the day I found my home." "I asked you where you wanted to go," Samuel remembered, "and you did not know. But we found it together, did we not? We found where we were meant to be." "We found each other," Maggie said. "And that was always the destination. I just did not know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. The lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, the laughter of children. It was the sound of a legacy being built, generation by generation, all stemming from a cowboy who rode after a woman driven from her town and asked a simple question. Where do you want to go? The answer, Maggie thought, was anywhere, as long as they went together. And they had, building a life of love and purpose that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would carry on the ranch and the healing work. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing they came from people who loved each other and who had built something meaningful from nothing. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Samuel squeezed Maggie's hand. "I love you," he said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you too," Maggie replied, as she always did and always would. And in that moment, surrounded by family and bathed in the fading light of day, they were complete. The town had driven her out, but the cowboy had rode beside her, and together they had found not just a destination but a home, not just survival but a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. Their story, which had begun with fear and uncertainty, had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and love to change lives and build futures. The ranch would prosper for generations. Maggie's healing techniques would be passed down through her daughter and granddaughters, helping countless people in the growing towns of Colorado. Samuel's horses would become legendary throughout the state. But more important than any material success was the love they had built, the family they had created, and the example they had set for everyone who knew them. Years later, when people in Durango told the story of the Kane family, they always started the same way, with a woman driven out of Silverton and a cowboy who rode after her, asking where she wanted to go. And the answer, though she had not known it at the time, had been simple: home. She had wanted to go home, and she had found it in the most unexpected place, in the heart of a good man, and the life they built together on a ranch in the Colorado mountains. And they lived there, loved there, and raised their family there, creating a legacy that would endure for generations, all because a cowboy chose kindness over indifference, and a woman chose hope over despair. Their love story became legend, told around fires and dinner tables, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best, and that home is not always a place, but the person you build your life with.